It was long ago, but the sky still impresses itself upon the imagination. In those wide spaces surrounded by bay, sweet fern, and vivid patches of butterfly weed. Appreciated better by a human note. The accent of a child's red bow, a woman's pink hat, in relation to the sweep of the Shinnecock moors. The fairy tale of an endless summer day.
Many artists have painted on Long Island, but it was William Merritt Chase who made the beaches and sandy hills here at Shinnecock one of the special places in American art. The late 19th century was obsessed with art. Chase shared that obsession. He made himself in every aspect of his being by how he dressed, how he lived, how he painted, the embodiment of its artistic ideals.
Young Mr. Chase came to New York from Indiana in 1869, having his father's consent to become an artist. He was 20 years old at the time. New York was still rather provincial. Horse carts lumbered along the streets in company with aristocratic carriages, and brownstone houses were considered the acme of elegance. Art was a negligible term. Victorian constraint seemed to rule everywhere. After 2 years studying at the National Academy of Design, Chase exhibited his first pictures. One, a still life of Catawba grapes and plums. But there was a great deal more to learn than the young artist could find in New York or anywhere in America at that time. His choice was to study in Munich at the Royal Academy. Expressing the longing of a whole generation of American artists, he said, "My God, I'd rather go to Europe than go to heaven." In the 1870s, Munich was as famous as Paris for training artists. These were the romantic days of King Ludwig in Bavaria. The golden age when Wagner created titanic music. And Carl von Piloty, a painter of vast canvases, was thought to be a great master.
In Munich, Chase had his first experience of great art, and his first real experience of artistic life, of the atmosphere of art, that for the rest of his life he found it impossible to live without. He spent 6 years in Munich, part of a close circle of American art students that included his friends Frank Duveneck and John Twachtman. They shared studios, they painted together, they used the same models. The closeness of artistic life in Munich is reflected in Chase's painting of his friend Duveneck, at work on his famous painting, The Turkish Page, a subject that Chase painted too. Their paintings are almost identical in composition and style. The Munich Academy in the 1870s was noted for its emphasis on technique. The bold, seemingly effortless, sweeping brushwork that came close to being pure painting. And subjects, like this one, called The Apprentice, were chosen mainly to allow virtuoso displays of painterly dexterity. The Court Jester, another Munich painting, is, in a way, Chase's masterpiece, literally the demonstration of the mastery of his craft. He sent it to the 1876 Centennial Exhibition in Philadelphia, where it won a Medal of Honor. All the Munich men, as they were called, were enthusiastic lovers of art, and especially the works of the old masters. So, before leaving Europe, Chase traveled to Holland to see the paintings of Frans Hals, Rembrandt, and other Dutch artists, absorbing what he saw and adapting it to his own work.
Chase had become a brilliant painter. The Royal Academy wanted him to stay on to teach, but even his mentor, Professor Pilotti, believed America would be a better place for the young artist. At the beginning of the 1880s, New York was well on the way to becoming a metropolis of the modern age. Chase joined the staff of the newly formed Art Students League, which attracted the most active and progressive young artists. But more important to his immediate success was his 10th Street studio. Visitors would enter a dark but sumptuous space, filled with treasures gathered from half the curiosity shops in the old world. The walls were hung with tapestries, antique armor. There was a Japanese umbrella, various specimens of old painting, and there also a curtained doorway into a second, larger room, the studio proper, containing the artist's most cherished paintings.
Chase created the finest and most famous studio in America, not as an affectation or an empty reflection of fashion, but from necessity. It was indispensable to his profession, both practically and symbolically. It provided a setting in which to fully appreciate art and the genius of the artist. Chase once said that it took inspiration to produce a masterpiece. He found that inspiration in the hangings, artifacts, and furniture that decorated his studio. In an almost physical way, Chase needed to be nourished by beauty and to inhale the atmosphere of art. But the objects he collected were also equipment, the properties for still lives, theatrical props used for his pictures. In fact, the studio itself was the subject of some of his finest paintings.
During the years Chase occupied this studio, his reputation as an artist and as a teacher grew steadily. He became one of the most celebrated and influential figures in the New York art world, representing everything that was brilliant and new. It was during this time he met and married Alice Gerson, an exceptionally beautiful young woman who posed for many paintings throughout their married life. Chase also gave private lessons in his studio. Dora Wheeler, one of his first students, sat for a portrait. She represented a new breed of American woman, well-educated, active in the arts. Between 1881 and 1885, Chase made yearly trips to Europe, and he began to paint outdoors. His picture of Robert Blum, an artist friend, was done in Holland, probably in the garden of Blum's home.
In the late 1880s, Chase began to make paintings very different from the ones he'd made before. He left the hermetic world of the studio and entered the real world, a world he depicted not with the dark colors that he took from the paintings of the old masters, but with a palette refreshed by the light and colors of nature. He produced a series of small landscapes, painted in Prospect Park in Brooklyn, where he lived briefly after his marriage in 1886, and Central Park in New York. Landscapes filled with the snap and sparkle of bright, crisp, natural light. Chase's park scenes reflect an influence that touched artists almost everywhere, beginning in the 1880s. The influence of French Impressionism. Chase's contemporaries realized the novelty and extraordinary beauty of these paintings, these little jewels, as some would call them. They also admired them for their distinctly American quality. At a time when many American artists believed that suitable subjects could only be found in Europe, Chase's park scenes proved that it was not subjects that were lacking in this country, but the eyes to see them with. In 1890, Chase was asked to direct the Shinnecock Summer School of Painting, which was to be the first important outdoor school of painting in America. He began teaching in the summer of 1891. And what's more, he found in the open landscape and atmosphere at Shinnecock what would be his most congenial and most compelling subject.
When Mr. Chase came to Shinnecock, he was at the height of his fame as a painter and as a teacher. His reputation attracted students from all parts of the country. Mondays and Tuesdays were Chase days. Each Monday morning, we gathered for comments on our work. Students sitting on little camp stools while receiving witty criticism. Mr. Chase also painted regularly as a lesson for the class. On Tuesdays, he went off with us for the entire day. Mr. Chase always made a student feel that the next time he or she would do the best thing ever. Don't paint the grandiose, he said. Paint the commonplace so that it will be distinguished. First, get color. Then concentrate on form. Try to paint the sky as if you could see through it. Thus we spent those halcyon days, totally enveloped in the atmosphere of art.
During the 10 years or so that he summered at Shinnecock, Chase painted with a greater power of observation, conviction, and inspiration than he ever had before, or ever would again. The spacious sweep of the land with glimpses of blue water and the great unobstructed expanse of sky at Shinnecock moved him to paint some of the most splendidly beautiful and most perfect landscapes ever made in America. Chase lived with his wife and children in the barren hills of Shinnecock, and from his house and studio, he could see the landscape from every window. To find something to paint, all he needed to do was to step out of his door. Several of his children were born here, and they often appear in his pictures. Earlier in his life, Chase was a conspicuous public figure, a self-made example for America of what it was to be an artist. But at Shinnecock, that changed. His art became more personal, more domestic. And some of the best and most serious work that Chase did at Shinnecock, he did here at his house and studio. Although his things are no longer in the house, the interior itself remains unchanged. Windows, stairway, even the paneled walls are today just as they were. The place where a large armoire once stood is still visible by its silhouette, a kind of ghostly trace of Chase's presence. In painting after painting, Chase's subject was his own domestic surroundings, his wife and growing family, enjoying the idle hours of summer. There seemed to be a wonderful wholeness of life and art here. Everything, interior and exterior, surface and substance, was held in delicate balance.
I remember some summer evenings when family and friends would dress in costumes to create living pictures in the manner of old master paintings, a popular form of entertainment called tableau vivant. The practice of life-imitating art, which had interested Chase since his Munich days. On one occasion, his daughter Helen, posed as a Velázquez Infanta, had so charmed a neighbor that Chase was commissioned to do a painting of her. Art reflecting life, and life in turn reflecting art, was a perpetual, endless cycle for Mr. Chase.
Chase's studio was here, in a room at the west end of the house, just off the central hall. North light, the kind preferred by painters, comes in through large windows. The room was once filled with furniture and decorative objects, as Chase had filled every studio he ever had. But what he earlier expounded publicly, here at Shinnecock, he examined privately. Chase considered the power of painting and the nature of art, what art does and how it does it, in newly subtle and thoughtful ways. It's been said that Chase was a painter of surfaces, not a man of high imagination, but a technician of good taste. And there's no doubt that he loved to paint the rich textures and colors that he surrounded himself with. The studio itself, again, often his subject. And this technical brilliance is one of the things that makes his paintings so extraordinarily lovely. Chase's Shinnecock paintings are the supreme example in all of his work, early or late, of his powers as a painter and of the power of painting itself to make the commonplace beautiful. His art wasn't imaginative art as the late 19th century understood it. He didn't idealize his figures or give them allegorical meaning. But his subject, as far as he was concerned, was the richest and most profound subject of all, the subject of art itself. Chase argued repeatedly for the primacy of technique, and he supported this belief by the example of his idol, Velázquez. One of Chase's great paintings of the Shinnecock studio, A Friendly Call, refers to Velázquez in several ways. The reflected view in the mirror, for example. Mirrors and mirror images appear prominently in a number of the Shinnecock interiors. The woman reflected in the mirror, while she herself seems reflective, isn't merely a visual pun. It represents a state of mind that touched much of what Chase did at Shinnecock, a psychological awareness and analytical thoughtfulness. The mirror image was itself, perhaps, the emblem of art, the mirror of nature for centuries, having been the standard for artistic illusion. By depicting paintings within paintings, frames within frames, Chase extends the question of pictorial illusion to a consideration of the meaning of art itself. At Shinnecock, Chase's art was more purely beautiful and deeper, more complex, more thoughtful by far than ever before.
When Mr. Chase began teaching summer classes at Shinnecock, he was determined to create a school of art that was truly American. By 1903, he felt that this was accomplished. Altogether, he taught for 21 years at the Art Students League, 12 at the New York School, and as many in Philadelphia. At the end, I'm sure Mr. Chase, who always thought of himself as a realist, was angered by young artists of the ashcan sort. But it was the futurists who evoked real nightmares, extolling aggressive movement. The beauty of speed, they said. The racing motor car. Chase believed he was a member of the most magnificent profession in the world. I'm very fond of Mr. Chase and his intensity for art. For me, the Shinnecock landscape will always be associated with his name.